executive branch will be covering this week. And so the first item that you will see on Canvas is going to be the Government 3 reading. And you'll just need to make a copy of it. It should do that automatically, but if it doesn't, make sure you make a copy. And then you'll be typing a comment or question for each selection on the left-hand side and at least 3 major points for each item on the right-hand side. And that is the first thing on Canvas at the top of the Government 3 module. And once again, when you click on that link that's in there, Government 3 Reading, it should open up a copy for you. So you just click Make a Copy. And you can see each of the individual items that goes along with your textbook is on the right-hand side. So the President's roles on pages 354 to 356. And the next one is the Constitution and Succession on page 359. So just make sure you follow those specific instructions because you're not supposed to read the entire chapter, just those points. So each of those items, you would put 3 significant items. And then on the left-hand side, you would put a comment or question. So you can go ahead and get started on that for the beginning of the period. About halfway through, we'll talk about the presidency itself and the notes, and then you can continue to work on that for the remainder of the period. So let's go ahead and look at the notes. And once again, this is Unit 3, the Executive Branch. Hopefully you have that notes page open, which is under the Government 3 Notebook assignment. And so first we will start with the presidency. And so first we'll look at the constitutional qualifications for the presidency. These are listed right in the Constitution, Article number 2. So these are the only rules that apply to the presidency. First, the president must be native born, so they have to be born here in the United States or its territories. Or at least one of their parents has to be an American. So they can't be born in another country as long as one of their parents is also an American. They have to have lived here for 14 years. And they must be 35 years of age. Of course, our current president and the last president cleared that 35 years twice, since they were both over 70. And just some other things about the presidency. Of course, one of the other items is that they can only hold office for 4 years at a time. It's also in Article 2. And according to Amendment 22, they can only be reelected once. So they can only hold office 2 times altogether. That was not added until the 20th century. Before then, it was just a tradition that people only ran twice. That was, of course, broken by FDR. And then, of course, the question is who takes over the presidency? I need to change any pictures in my presentations, of course, because this will be different now. But Amendment number 25 says that if the president, of course, leaves office in some way, then the vice president takes over. And believe it or not, before the Amendment 25 was passed, The Constitution said that the vice president would just assume the powers. It never actually technically said the vice president became the president. We just decided to start doing that. But Amendment 25 made it official. Amendment 25 also allows Congress to set up who else falls in line after that. And so after the vice president is the Speaker of the House. They're third in line to inherit the presidency. And then after that is the most senior member of the Senate. And then it goes to the cabinet in the order of which they were created. Now, of course, this is still a flawed system because if a nuclear bomb went off in Washington, D.C., there's a good chance that all those people would be killed at once. So some people have said that that needs to be reformed and changed in some way. Then, of course, what are the duties of the president? Well, probably the most well-known title that the president has besides president is what? Anybody know? A hint would be the picture. The commander-in-chief. So one of the most important things that he does is he is the commander-in-chief. But that one's pretty obvious, and everybody knows about that already. But he is also the head of government, which means he oversees the entire executive branch. In other countries, that's done by a prime minister or a chancellor. And so as the head of government, he does all kinds of things. Supervises the economy. He's in charge of all the federal government employees. All kinds of things. The president is also the head of state, which means they are the chief diplomat. In other countries, this is a separate person. It is sometimes a president, it is sometimes a king or queen. But usually the two, head of government and head of state, are not the same. But in the United States, it is the same person. And informally, the president's another duty that they have is they're also the head of their political party. So right now, for instance, the head of the Democratic Party would be Joe Biden. Last year, the head of the Republican Party would have been Donald Trump. And so how does the president approach the job? Well, the president can either be passive or active. A passive president relies on advisors. They typically aren't involved a lot in the decision-making process or in lots of information. Ronald Reagan is a good example of that. He was a passive president. He was an actor originally, so he didn't have a lot of experience necessarily in politics. He had been governor of California, but he relied a lot on advisors, and he also didn't like lots of information. He actually asked that anything brought to the Oval Office would be just 1 to 2 page summaries, and so he was more of a passive president. Active presidents make most of the decisions. And they also like lots of information. So the president on the right, that was right after Ronald Reagan, was George H.W. Bush, also known as Bush the Elder. He was the opposite of Ronald Reagan, even though they served together as president and vice president. But George H.W. Bush turned out to be a different kind of president when he inherited the office from Ronald Reagan, winning an election. And he was more involved in all of the decisions that go on. Then, of course, there is how the presidency is treated. And first of all, it can be treated in a negative or positive way. That doesn't mean they treat it badly or good. It means how they view it themselves as a person. And so someone who is a negative president really doesn't like lots of public attention. They don't like meeting and greeting lots of people. They probably didn't even want to be president themselves. They were probably asked to run, and they only did so out of a sense of duty to their country. Usually, a negative president is what we call an introverted person, someone that doesn't like to be involved with a lot of other people. Ulysses S. Grant is a good example. He had been a Civil War general, so a lot of people thought it would be a good idea if he became president. So he reluctantly agreed, but he didn't like a lot of the fanciness and all the people and a lot of the work that went along with it. So he actually tried to avoid being in the White House for long periods of time. And then there are positive presidents. They love the fancy lifestyle. They enjoy all the attention. Usually they're an extroverted person. They thrive in the limelight. So Bill Clinton would be a good example of a positive president. Now, is it possible to be a good president historically and be a negative one? Yes, that is possible. Just like you can be a combination of these things. Ronald Reagan was a passive president, but he was also a positive president. So he let other people do a lot of the work, but he still enjoyed the fanciness of the White House. After all, he used to be an actor. And so it is possible to be a mix of the two different things. And then one other thing I'd like to mention is leadership. There's also how they lead the rest of the executive branch. And there's three basic ways we can categorize presidents. One is that they're autocratic, which means that they make all the decisions. Autocratic is spelled A-U-T-O-C-R-A-T-I-C. So auto like an automobile and cratic. So they like to make all the decisions. Then there's the opposite of them. And this would be more in line with a passive president. They're known as a laissez-faire, which is spelled L-A-I-S-S-E-Z F-A-I-R-E. And laissez-faire means that they basically don't like to be involved. They take a very limited approach. Their cabinet and their presidential advisors basically are allowed to take control and do what they want. Then there's the spot that's in between, and that's known as democratic leadership. And don't confuse that with a political party, because Republicans or Democrats could be democratic leaders. What that means is they do have some control, but they also have some freedom for their employees. So democratic is kind of halfway in between autocratic and laissez-faire. And this isn't just for presidents. This could even be someone that runs, McDonald's, a manager. They're someone who needs to breathe over everyone's neck and make all the decisions and watch everyone carefully. That would be an autocratic manager. Or they kind of let the employees do what they want and they don't seem to pay attention too often. That would be laissez-faire. Or maybe they're a little bit of both. Maybe they control some aspects of the restaurant, but in other aspects they trust the employees to do their jobs. And I just want to go over a few of the earlier presidents just to finish us off with the notes for today. So early presidents. And the first one would be George Washington. And the question we might ask is, what precedents did Washington set? And precedent, which is spelled up there on the screen, P-R-E-C-E-D-E-N-T-S, those are traditions. And that's obviously one of the things that Washington did that was most important. He was the first president, so he basically set the tone for other presidents to follow. One of the things, of course, is he put into practice the dignity and honor of the presidency. So he believed, in other words, it should be a respectable office. But at the same time, he didn't think it should be like royalty. So he didn't want to be called His Majesty or anything like that. He just wanted to be called Mr. President. And that's something that we've stuck with since. So he believed it should be respectable but simple. He also believed in the supreme power of the federal government. He knew that it was important that the new government not look weak. So, for instance, when a bunch of farmers in western Pennsylvania and other places rebelled over a tax placed on whiskey, he decided to lead the army himself out to western Pennsylvania to crush the rebellion. Of course, by the time they got there, it had weakened and kind of fizzled out. But he needed to prove that this new government would stand up to a challenge. And the next one that I would like to mention would be Thomas Jefferson. And so, what did Jefferson believe about the Constitution? Well, Washington was kind of neutral and he tried not to take sides, but Jefferson was very clearly what we call a strict constructionist. A strict constructionist. That means he believed we should only do exactly what the Constitution says. So he believes we should follow it literally. Strict constructionist. So he didn't think that we should have a really big government, so he slashed the size of it and laid off a lot of government employees. And he, of course, wanted to try to pay down the debt, which was still left over from the Revolutionary War. But one thing that he found out is that it's hard to do that. It's hard to follow the Constitution literally. And one of the things that he's most well known for is the Louisiana Purchase. This great deal came along. Napoleon needed money, so he wanted to sell off the Louisiana Territory, which is a huge amount of land. But Jefferson searched through the Constitution, and it didn't say anything about the president making agreements about buying land. But he knew if he waited for Congress to act, then the deal might go to some other country. And so he went ahead and started the arrangements to make the Louisiana Purchase. And so just because you say you want to literally follow something doesn't mean that you'll be able to do that all the time. And so what are some general trends that we started to see once we had 3 presidents? So what are some general trends? The first one would be that presidents usually become unpopular. Presidents usually become unpopular. So throughout their terms, usually their popularity goes down. That happened to Washington, and it also happened to Jefferson. It obviously happened to Adams because he didn't get reelected. 2, they usually become more moderate. They become more moderate. In other words, they moderate what they said they were going to do or what their goals were with the government because they discovered it's not always possible, so sometimes you have to compromise. So they usually become more moderate. And so the next one I want to look at is Andrew Jackson. So why is Andrew Jackson a strong president? One of the reasons is that he vetoed more bills than all previous presidents combined. So he was willing to stand up to Congress. Vetoed more bills, more laws, I should say, than all the previous presidents combined. The second reason why he was a strong president is he was willing to stand up to those that would break the law. He was willing to stand up to those that break the law. The United States passed a tax on imports known as a tariff, and the state of South Carolina refused to collect it and threatened to secede from the Union. So President Jackson, in turn, threatened to invade South Carolina with the United States Army. And so just like Washington before him, he didn't want to back down from a fight. and tried to keep the country together. Now, Jackson's also controversial because he gave permission basically for southern states to have Native Americans removed forcibly, even if they had assimilated into traditional European culture. And he also was not that kind to African Americans either. So the next question up here, what happens when a president dies? And at the time, we really didn't know because, like I said, until the 25th Amendment was passed, it didn't officially say that the vice president should become the president. So the guy up here on the screen, John Tyler, was the first president to have this happen. He wasn't the one who died, he was the one who inherited the office. And so the president before him, William Henry Harrison, and actually he died for some pretty trivial reason, ended up speaking outside in the rain for over an hour without a coat on. Well, this lowered, of course, his immune system, and he ended up catching pneumonia and died within 30 days. He's the president who held office for the least amount of time. Well, when Tyler basically insisted, since it says in the Constitution, I assume the powers of the presidency, that must mean I should become the president. Well, obviously, the cabinet didn't want to give up their power. They wanted to be in charge instead. So there was an argument about whether or not Tyler should actually become president. Well, he snuck out in the middle of the night and got a judge to swear the oath of office to him. And so he basically took the stand that he was the president. His cabinet, most of them ended up quitting over this, and so it weakened him. But he set the tradition that the vice president would become the president of the United States. And so the next time that it happened, we followed it. Unfortunately for him, though, it weakened his presidency. Many people jokingly refer to him instead of his presidency as his accidency instead. And then lastly, I'll finish with President Lincoln. So why is President Lincoln considered one of the greatest? Probably the most significant reason why he's often rated by historians as the greatest president of all time is because he kept the Union together. He kept the Union together. But probably a second reason why is that he used immense power to do so, but was willing to give it up. Congress had given him, and his own attorney general had given him permission to use lots of power to win the Civil War. But when the Civil War started winding down at the end of his presidency, before he was assassinated, he agreed that the South should be welcomed back and they should be forgiven. So he didn't want to keep using his powers necessarily to punish the South. So he could have been somewhat of a tyrant. He would have been able to do that because Congress backed him in this respect. In fact, some people in Congress wanted the South to be punished severely. But he wasn't willing to do that, and he wanted the country to get back to normal, despite the fact that the South had committed an illegal traitorous act by seceding. So, those are some of the presidents I wanted to mention up through Lincoln, and tomorrow I'll go over a few more that happened after his presidency. He, of course, would die in 1865. Now, for the remainder of class, you can go ahead and continue to work on the reading, or if you'd like, you can go ahead and explore some of the other activities that are there for the rest of the week.